Jamie Banks is a founder and president of Quiet Communities, and she is a healthcare and environmental scientist with an extensive background in health outcomes and economics, environmental behavior, and policy. And she brings this multi-faced perspective to her work. Welcome. And our second speaker, Sarah Parmalee, is Piedmont Environmental Council's land use representative for Culpeper and Rappahannock counties. And she's been with the Piedmont Environmental Council since 2022. And before that, she was with Virginia Department of Forestry. And she actually started looking at noise when one of the data centers in Culpeper Tech Zone asked to renegotiate their noise pair-offs in 2024. So welcome, and we'll start with Jamie, right?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you, Kasia and Nicole, for arranging this. So I'm going to be talking about data center noise and impacts on health and environment. Just to quickly tell you what I'm going to be talking about, I'll give a brief introduction on myself and Quiet Communities, talk about just some basic information on noise, and then talk about noise as a public health and environmental problem, and then, of course, focus on data center and crypto mining noise. So my background, as Kasia mentioned, I have an extensive health background, specialized in health outcomes, economics, policy, environment. I chair the Noise and Health Committee for the American Public Health Association. I am a member of a special interest group at the International Society for Environmental Epidemiology on Noise, and I'm a member of the American Heart Association. Quiet Communities, we're a national nonprofit, a 501c3. We're a coalition of scientific, medical, and legal professionals concerned with noise and the absence of effective federal legislation to abate and control it today. We used to have implementation and enforcement of the Noise Control Act of 1972, but that all ended in 1982. And so authority was really handed over to states and localities who I think some of us know have not been terribly effective and often very messy. Our mission, apart from promoting quiet as a natural resource, is to work to reduce harmful noise and related pollution, create quieter, more sustainable, more livable communities. And we work in all sorts of areas, not just data centers and crypto mining, obviously, but other industry, transportation, land care, construction, and so forth. And with our work, we take an evidence-based approach to looking at the problem, a systems orientation. It's usually not just one thing, but a set of things that shape the problem. And we're concerned, or we're driven to find solutions that are practical and feasible, and hopefully in a collaborative way by engaging with various stakeholders. Our work really sits at this juncture of community issues, science, and policy. And we do a lot of different things. I won't go into them all, but you can just see from these dark boxes here the kinds of things that we do. We work with all kinds of communities that are being seriously impacted by these different kinds of noise. So a lot of people don't understand, what is it about noise? They're not bothered. Well, we know that there's more and more communities that are really being plagued with noise that is harmful, that's constant, and that they can't get away from. And these are a lot of the communities that we work with. So just turning now to noise basics. People often say, well, what's the difference between sound and noise? Sound is a physical phenomenon. It's a physical wave phenomenon, and it's something you can hear. It becomes noise when it's unwanted and or harmful. That's actually the new definition of noise that's been adopted by the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Noise and is increasingly cited in the scientific literature. Noise has a lot of different characteristics. The most common way in which it's thought of is sound energy that's measured by decibels. But of course, it also has a frequency spectrum, which is important, a pattern. Is it fluctuating? Is it steady? Is it impulsive? How long does it last? What's the duration? Does it have tonal components that make for a hum, a whine, a whistle? Does it have a rough edge to it, a sharpness, or dissonance where you have different sounds clashing and being particularly unpleasant? So there's a lot of different characteristics to consider. But unfortunately, the existing regulatory paradigm that underlies everything relies on one of those characteristics, decibel, that represents sound energy and is typically the A-weighted decibel that underweights low frequency components in sound. And I'm going to be talking about that when I talk about the data center noise. So it's ignoring all of these other things that bear on human response and human impact. As an example, if we just use decibels, an 85 decibel sound from a cello concerto and from a gas leaf blower would affect us in the same way. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't think that they affect people in the same way. It certainly doesn't affect me in the same way. Very, very different. Noise is a public health problem. It was first declared a public health problem by Surgeon General William Stewart in 1968. We knew at that time not only the auditory effects, but also non-auditory effects. So these health impacts extend from hearing impacts, which intuitively we think of our ears when we think of noise. It can be in the form of noise-induced hearing loss, tinnitus, or a ringing in the ears, an internal ringing in the ears, hyperacusis, where there's a sound sensitivity, extreme sound sensitivity to noise. That can even go so far as to cause pain. It can cause and contribute to cardiovascular problems, heart disease, heart attack, stroke, and cardiometabolic disease. And it can also affect our neurological system, resulting in conditions like anxiety and depression, contributing to neurodegenerative diseases and cognitive impairments. The statistics in the US are pretty lacking. We don't have a lot of funding for noise or for looking at how noise is affecting people or how many people are affected. What we do know is that 1 billion people worldwide are being affected by things like loud concert music, personal listening devices, other sources of everyday noise, and that more than 100 million Americans are at risk for cardiovascular and other problems from everyday exposure. The impacts on our hearing result from damage to the inner ear. So within our ear, there's a structure called the cochlea, and there are hair cells within the cochlea that respond to sound. When they're damaged, our ability to hear is permanently lost, and this damage is not reversible. These are structures that help transmit sound to the nerves that then take the signal and are processed by the brain. The non-hearing health impacts that I mentioned are mediated by the stress response. And a lot of that starts with an organ in the brain called the amygdala. It's responsible for emotional processing, stress processing, and so forth. Now, with noise, there's not only the stress that's caused by the noise itself, but I think many of you probably know that there are secondary stressors that happen because of this noise. You can have your daily activities disrupted. You're unable to enjoy your property indoors or outdoors. You feel powerless to control it because you shut your doors and windows and that noise does not go away. Nobody's responding. You might fear that your property is losing value. You might see its impacts on other people, your pets, farm animals, other neighbors and friends. You might see an impact on your environment. We've heard people say that a lot of the wildlife that used to be in their backyards has now disappeared. That lack of response by authorities to effectively address the noise can cause stress. And then people can feel stigmatized when they complain that they're just kind of crazy and they complain all the time, rather than saying there's a problem here. The way noise and stress work in the body. This is a diagram. Noise enters through the ears. The amygdala is activated by the annoyance that's caused, sleep disruption when you hear that noise, other cognitive and emotional responses. When that gets activated, it results in the production of stress hormones like cortisol, which in turn activate what's called the sympathetic nervous system. And that then elevates all kinds of risk factors, blood glucose, cholesterol, etc. And it sets off a process of oxidative stress and inflammation of the blood vessels, causing high blood pressure and arterial plaques. And all this together over time increases the risk of heart disease, heart attack, stroke, cardiometabolic disease, anxiety, depression, cognitive impairments. So I mentioned that this is something that's well known and has been known for decades. The science has been advancing very dramatically with what's known, and as I indicated in the last diagram, the mechanisms by which noise causes these problems is known now, increasingly being clarified at the molecular and cellular levels. So you can see here the Centers for Disease Control. This is an old statement. Continual exposure to noise can cause stress, anxiety, depression, high blood pressure, heart disease, many other health problems. The World Health Organization, excessive noise seriously harms human health and interferes with people's daily activities at school, work, home, and during leisure time. It can disturb sleep, cause cardiovascular and psychophysiological effects, reduce performance, and provoke annoyance responses and changes in social behavior. So noise is not just a nuisance or an annoyance. It's something that can cause serious health problems. It turns out that nighttime noise has more pronounced effects because of the disruption in our chemistry. Our health and well-being depend on having undisturbed sleep of sufficient duration, and noise, especially when it's fluctuating or intermittent, can interrupt and fragment sleep, impairing the ability of our brain and bodies to recuperate. Levels of stress hormones are increased, and physiological conditions that are created lead to that injury of blood vessels and long-term health effects. And lastly, noise impairs children's learning. So when these facilities are put near schools and this noise is being heard through walls and windows, it can impair ability of teachers to concentrate and teach their classes and of students to learn. Within our population, there are people who are especially vulnerable. This includes infants and children, veterans who may have post-traumatic stress, seniors, neurodivergent populations, and people affected with hearing disorders, sensory processing disorders, behavioral disorders like attention deficit, and pre-existing diseases, cardiovascular problems, and psychiatric problems. And I just have one slide on this, but it's an important one. Just as noise affects human health, it also affects the health and well-being of wildlife, agriculture, and ecosystems. And this happens through the stress response, like I mentioned, but it's also that man-made noise that can prevent wildlife from finding reproductive partners, from finding prey, from evading predators, and all these things, along with other stressors, contribute to a reduction in biodiversity. Okay, so here we are. This is our focus today. So data center and crypto noise. This is the kind of noise people are hearing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year round. It comes from data storage centers. It also comes from hyperscale AI data centers. The main culprits are cooling towers and generators. With crypto mining, it's hundreds to thousands of ventilation fans operating simultaneously. And then, of course, there's the power plants that are helping to power these facilities that are also causing noise. So the characteristics, they're chronic duration. This is broadband noise, but with prominent low frequency and tonal components. And I'll show you what that means in just a moment. It's capable at the right frequency of possibly vibrating structural elements. And some people say they can even feel that vibration within their bodies. The levels are not steady. They fluctuate. There are temperature inversions at night with weather. There's power level changes. People often say the noise sounds louder at night. That could be because of the difference between ambient and the actual noise level being emitted, or it could be something like a temperature inversion that's causing that. The kinds of things that we're hearing reported, the kinds of symptoms reported, or is this list here? Hearing loss, tinnitus, ear problems, pressure in the ear, sleep disruption, headaches, vertigo, nausea, blood pressure rise, heart palpitations, pain, anxiety, depression, et cetera, et cetera. In some cases, the need even for emergency room visits and the need to change medication regimens. The longer term implications of those kinds of symptoms are things like permanent hearing damage, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disorders, psychiatric disorders, impaired learning, and reduced work productivity. So I mentioned that this kind of noise has strong low frequency components. So low frequency sound has a very long wavelength. Its energy is very poorly attenuated as it travels over air, ground, or water. So it can carry loud sound over long distances. It can readily penetrate windows and structures, and it's notoriously difficult to mitigate. It's the kind of sound that if you put up sound barrier, unless it's very close to the source of the sound, it just goes up and around and continues on. So this is a real problem. And we know that there have been data centers that have invested millions of dollars thinking that barriers can stop the noise, only to know that to find out that that money's really been wasted because it has not effectively mitigated the noise. Low frequency noise is present in many, many sources of environmental noise. It's responsible for the majority of noise complaints. It causes distress at lower decibel levels than higher frequency noise does. It's an underappreciated risk to human health, has a greater negative impact on annoyance, sleep disturbance, and non-auditory health, and it is not properly represented by the A-weighted decibel. The A-weighted decibel underweights low frequency components. Then there are those tonal components that happen within a very narrow frequency band. That can be a source of whining, whistling, again, a major contributor to annoyance and stress. It can make the tone uneven and at a volume that can disrupt sleep. And when they're clashing tonal sounds, that's producing dissonance that is perceived as particularly unpleasant. And just going back to this earlier slide, our regulatory paradigms only rely on this one characteristic that is not properly representing the sound or connecting it to the kinds of health symptoms and outcomes that it should be. If we just use that A-weighted decibel, what we're measuring is in this part of the frequency spectrum here. 1,000 hertz is the metric used for frequency, 1,000 to like 8,000 hertz. That's really what's represented by the A-weighted decibel. But the sound that dominates or is predominant in data center noise, crypto mining noise, occurs in this low frequency area. So you're missing that low frequency contribution to the sound and to these tonal components, these peaks that exist within very narrow frequency bands that's causing a lot of disturbance. So how do we measure this in a meaningful way? Just using the sound level is not going to do it. Then there's something called one-third octave band analysis. I'm not an acoustic engineer, so I'm going to just disclose that right away, but I know this at a basic level. One-third octave band analysis is the result here would be these green bars that you see. And what you see in the red, this line, is what you get from narrowband frequency analysis. And it's here in the narrow frequency band analysis that you can see these tonal components that are missed when you just do a one-third octave band analysis. So it's very important to get this kind of analysis when you have an acoustic engineer come and do recordings, or you do this yourself with the right equipment or with the right smartphone app. This is really the kind of thing you want to see. You want to see this detail because these things bear very importantly on how that sound is impacting us. And this is my last slide. I mentioned that William Stewart, US Surgeon General, decades ago, first declared noise to be a public health hazard in 1968. And in 1978, he made the statement, calling noise a nuisance is like calling smog an inconvenience. Noise must be considered a hazard to the health of people everywhere. And we hope that we can raise awareness and educate our people, our legislators enough that this is going to be appreciated at some point. So thank you very much for your attention. I did want to mention that some of you may have heard, we have a community survey that we're doing in collaboration with an organization called Science for Georgia to assess community impact of data center noise. And while Sarah is talking, I will put a link to that in the chat for any community members that have experienced this and want to participate in the survey. So thank you for your time.
So I'll just go ahead and say I am also not a noise engineer, and there is only so deep into this discussion that I'm able to go comfortably. What I have to share with you is kind of my experience from researching this issue. Virginia, as I'm sure everybody knows, is the de facto data center capital of the world. And so we kind of have an interesting perspective on how to deal with noise, or rather not. This is my general disclaimer. Noise is a complex and highly technical issue. I think we all appreciate that after Jamie's wonderful presentation. If you could go to the next slide, please.
Hang on, I screwed it up.
No worries.
I can't tell how to like share my full screen and still be able to admit people. So just give me 1 second.
Yeah, no worries. Some of these slides that I'm going to show you I've actually taken from a presentation to a work group in Prince William County. There we are. I've included a link to that site at the end of this presentation. It's a really great resource, I think, because Prince William County, it's a complicated issue, but they did invest quite a bit of time and money into looking at how could we regulate noise in data center noise in particular in our county to protect our residents. I don't agree with all the decisions that they made, but they did do some really good research that I think is a fabulous resource for other folks looking to draft noise ordinances. But as Jamie alluded to, most noise is measured in the A-weighted decibel. Something that I think is really important to know about the decibel scale is that every increase by 3 points represents a doubling of the amount of noise. So if you have a neighborhood with an ambient noise measurement of 40 dBA, and then you add a data center that is also producing 40 dBA, your ambient noise dBA is now 43. So it is doubled. And if you add more and more, you're increased, even though it doesn't look like you're moving the needle very much, the impact is very significant from a lived perspective. If you could go to the next slide, please. Data center noise enforcement is incredibly difficult. most noise law is written to be able to tell your neighbors to turn the music off and go to bed. It's not written with continuous noise in mind. Most of the ordinances that I've seen are complaint driven. So they're not localities going out and monitoring noise. They have to be notified that there is a problem first. And then readings are typically, again, because this is designed for making your neighbors turn off the music and go to bed, most readings are supposed to be taken by either your local staff or your police, someone with a basic noise reader, which might not necessarily account for all of those other variations that make noise problematic. And then with data centers in particular, it's often very unclear who is responsible for actually addressing the issue. It's not like you can knock on the door and tell them to keep it down. There's going to be a gate. It's going to be unclear, who's actually responsible for the facility, and who's responsible for, the actual enforcement. Is it your zoning department? Is it your police? And that all takes a long, long time to figure out. I was in a meeting about noise enforcement last week with the Virginia American Planners Association chapter, and the head of the planning for Prince William County estimated that it would potentially take up to 2 months just to get an accurate noise reading to determine there was a violation, let alone fixing a problem. So very, very long lead time for any sort of response. And then I'm not sure about for other states, but in Virginia, emergency generator operations are exempt from noise laws. And there is good reason for this. Most hospitals have a backup generator in the event that the power goes off. And you can understand why if power is going out very infrequently, it's not very often an issue. What we're seeing in Virginia is increased interest in using these emergency generators for longer and longer times. And our Department of Environmental Quality just changed the definition of what constitutes an emergency to include a much wider window when these generators could be operating free of any noise restraints. If you could go to the next slide. All right, so there are not a ton of great noise ordinances out there. Honestly, a lot of the best research and language I found was from unadopted recommendations from the 1978 era studies. But there have been some localities that have been kind of on the cutting edge. Chandler, Arizona is an interesting one. It has a lot of emphasis on modeling and testing, and making sure there is a contact for the data center for the community to complain to. Frederick, Maryland has a little bit of language about vibration as well as noise. Loudoun County, kind of the epicenter of this whole thing, does have some screening requirements. I know that's not the end all, but it can be helpful. And then Prince William County has possibly some good stuff that they didn't go far enough with, I think. If you could go to the next slide. So some of the good stuff that I think Prince William County did was they broke out multiple types or multiple ways to measure noise. And they're the first county in Virginia that we've seen do this, to include a dBA as well as a dBc in their measurements. As we know, noise is very complex. There's a lot of different layers. There's a lot of different ways to measure it. Just going to a dBc is also going to have issues. So it's really important to have the dBA and the dBc. They also included different noise levels for different durations of noise. So if it's a short-term noise, it's a little bit more lenient with the expectation that that noise is not going to be lasting forever. If you could go to the next slide. They also started including these octave bands, which I think are one of the most important things that we could possibly be looking at, just because I know that complaints that I've heard from data centers or folks living next to data centers in Loudoun and Prince William, whistling the weird wah, wah, wah from the tonal imbalance, and having these octave frequency bands can lead to really accurate enforcement and restriction of these noise issues. I think Prince Williams are probably still too high to address a lot of the public health concerns and just the livability complaints that the community has been throwing out. But I think it's a really good step, and I think that these multiple layers of noise protection is a really good thing. If you could go to the next. All right, so some general recommendations. Number one, don't allow data centers near residential areas or sensitive receptors. We're really only starting to see these noise or hear these noise problems in the past few years as data centers have moved out of industrial and commercial areas and into people's backyards. And we've been able to see firsthand that most localities don't have a great plan for how to deal with noise before it happens. As I alluded to with Prince William County earlier, that it can be very unclear whose responsibility it is to respond and how to actually hold, the violator responsible. Noise modeling needs to be a part of the data center site plan process. There needs to be a noise study submitted to make sure that they're going to, comply with all of the local noise standards, even if they're not very good. That's still valuable information. Ambient noise testing prior to construction of the data center. This is huge because if you only start testing once the problem exists, it can be hard to show that your neighborhood was only at 40 decibels before all of this stuff happened. So having that baseline is really, really important. It's also important that testing of the data centers occur as each building comes online. If you wait until they're all online before doing a test and then realize you have a huge problem, you've missed a lot of opportunities to make the situation better. Also having annual testing to ensure that they're still within compliance and not waiting for those complaint-based reports. Another thing that we're starting to see Loudoun and Prince William do is create a portal for people to file noise complaints. Not just for data centers, for everything else, but this is a really important because it goes back to that sense, giving people a sense of agency and also creating a public record for people when they, if they know they're not the only one that's experiencing these issues. Also making sure that the staff have, or whoever's going to be doing noise testing, and even citizens who are being affected by data centers, have noise meters and can operate them to take accurate and credible readings, which is very important for enforcement. And then having consequences for violators beyond civil penalties and citizen lawsuits. In Virginia, the maximum you can be fined for a noise violation is $250 a day. For a data center, that is nothing. And so it's really, really important that there be additional consequences from some governing body beyond these slap on the wrist fines. If you want to go to the next slide. This is another county in Virginia that has this one little line in their data center code of ordinances, which I think is a really great idea. Which if they are in violation of the permissible DBA, they have 48 hours to fix the violation or operations shall be rescinded. They will pull their occupancy permit. This hasn't been put to the test yet. Pennsylvania hasn't built any data centers yet, but I think this is a really good incentive for any data center operator to know, all right, if I want to be able to stay online and make my money, I need to make sure that I'm going to, be within the local standards. If you could go to the next slide. So there's a lot of pushback on noise enforcement. One of the things that we've seen from the data center industry writ large whenever we've asked for any sort of data center regulation is, why us? Why are you picking on us and not any of the other industries? I've also heard from the data center industry that, lawnmowers are more loud than we are, and trains and roads, all of these things are also loud. And that this noise dampening equipment or designing your data center to be less noise impactful is going to be too expensive for them. We've also had a little bit of pushback from other industries in the area that don't want to have to be beholden to new noise standards and potentially have to retrofit their equipment. If you could go to the next. These are kind of my responses. Data centers are being asked to regulate their noise because they are causing the biggest problem with noise. Yes, a lot of other noises are as loud as data centers, if not louder, but they aren't continuous. And a lot of them die down at night, which, as we know, is one of the more impactful times for noise. And then, as to the complaint that design for reduced noise construction or for reduced noise impact is too expensive, failure to design your data center so that, the noise is not impactful is simply shifting those costs from that multi-billion-dollar company onto the public and the cost that it is going to represent to public health. And then, in terms of other industries, I think a way to get around that is focusing primarily on the long duration noise and night operations, since a lot of your industries that are going to be located near residential areas are not going to have those intense night operations. They also potentially aren't going to have that same tonality. So that's kind of my spiel. If you could go to the last, these are the some of the decent examples, I think. There's no perfect one yet. I'm happy to make these slides available. But this is, I think the data center, the Prince William County Data Center Ordinance Advisory Committee did a lot of really good work. Even though not all their recommendations were taken up, there was a lot of data center influence on that commit on the final actions of that committee. But their reports and their presentations are a wealth of information.
Quiet communities.